Welcome everyone to our second annual No Footprint event, Not Every Woman. We are so excited that you have joined us for this panel discussion with women who have exerted their reproductive right to be child-free in honor of such issues as women and girls' rights and environmental sustainability. Panelists today include authors, a film director, a medical doctor, environmental activist, and youth representation to gain a broad perspective on the motivations, challenges, and impact of the child-free choice. So we are so glad that you have joined us. We'll get started in a few minutes. So whether this is your first or 100th webinar, we just ask that you review the Zoom tips and reminders on the screen as we get started. Again, welcome everyone to our second annual No Footprint event, Not Every Woman. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you the Director of Marketing and Communications and our amazing moderator for today's panel, Missy Thurston.
Thank you so much, Bria, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have some wonderful panelists and a lot of questions for our panelists, so we're excited to jump right in. If you have questions, please put your questions into the Q&A. Some will get answered during the panel, but undoubtedly we will run out of time. Luckily, our panelists, though, have graciously agreed to be part of a VIP event that will happen after this panel for our Giving Circles members. And they have also agreed to take some of the questions that come in the Q&A during the panel that we're not able to get to. So what we'll do is we will send a few of those questions via email, and we'll do a follow-up PMC blog next week where you can see some additional questions answered. So we are going to introduce our esteemed panelists in just a moment. But first, let's watch the trailer from Maxine's film, To Kid or Not to Kid, to set the stage for our discussion.
When are you going to have a baby? That, without doubt, is the question young married couples hear most. After all, isn't that what the American dream is all about?
I always put off my decision to have children.
Childless women can never be happy.
The childless choice is a sort of cancer in our culture.
We need to have higher birth rates in this country.
I've spent my life surrounded by children, but if I ever considered not having them...
Not having children, you could say that's selfish.
You and I not having a family, that's it.
It's really hard to talk about.
So I started asking the question, why can't we talk about not having children?
Do you know anybody that's made the decision not to have children?
She started in pretty much right away, like, oh, you want sterilization, why do you not want kids?
I've been told you're not a complete woman until you become a mother.
The baby products industry is expected to hit $49 billion.
You are saying if you are giving life, you've done a better job than if you haven't.
Having kids is probably the best thing most people do because they have created life.
It's against all natural instincts when two people get married for them not to have children.
For me, and millions of men and women,
they hand her to me and I'm like, oh, she's beautiful, and oh my God, what did I just do?
It's one of the biggest questions
I would rather die on the operating table than have a baby.
Of our lives.
So, we had sex last night. Do you think there might be a chance that...
I think there's a chance. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had trouble sleeping. I wouldn't be so nervous.
It's estimated that 40 to 50% of American pregnancies are unintended.
I don't know.
Thank you for playing that film trailer, production team. So the topic of this panel was inspired by To Kid or Not to Kid. With rising awareness about gender equity, climate change, resource scarcity, and global population, that this film does ask that important question. Why can't we talk about not having children? Population Media Center is so honored to have these guests and those of you in the audience as we take a closer look at the choice to be child-free and what that looks like for women. It's an aspect of reproductive choice that is often misunderstood, mischaracterized, or considered too taboo to discuss. So I'm honored to be joined by these four women today. Maxine Trump, award-winning director of To Kid or Not to Kid, author, and much more. Maxine has chosen to be child-free and is joining us today from Brooklyn, New York. Thank you for joining us, Maxine. Dr. Amy Blackstone, a professor of sociology at the University of Maine, has been studying the history and evolution of the child-free choice since 2008 and is author of Childfree by Choice. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Blackstone. Dr. Aditi Gupta, who has been a practicing OBGYN in the New York area for over 15 years. She is the founder and CEO of Walk-In GYN Care. Dr. Gupta has chosen to be child-free and is joining us from New York. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Gupta. And Emma Lim, a 19-year-old environmental activist and McGill student who created the pledge movement, No Future, No Children. She is a founding member of Climate Strike Canada. Emma is joining us today from Montreal. Thanks for joining us, Emma. So let's dive right in. So let's begin our discussion with Maxine. So first of all, Maxine, thank you for making this film. Can you begin? Yes. Can you begin by telling us briefly why you decided to create the film and a bit about its impact?
Sure. I mean, to be brutally honest, and thank you everyone that may have seen the film already, and we'll send you details where you can see it if you haven't. But I mean, essentially, I didn't want to bring an unwanted child into the air, to the planet. So that is kind of, in a nutshell, the reason why I wanted to make this film. But when I started filming in 2013, there was nothing out there that I could kind of relate to or watch, or, you know, I'm a filmmaker. There were brilliantly, thank goodness, there were a couple of books, Ellen Peck, Laura Carroll's book, but I wasn't seeing myself reflected back in films or TV. So I was like, if I need this, I'm sure other people need it too. And, you know, you've asked about impact as well. And it's obvious that people needed it. We've had thousands and thousands and thousands of responses. It's been absolutely mind-blowing. And we've had people say to us, it changed our life watching this film. We were told you know, it was a waste of a uterus. We were a waste of a uterus. Other people saying they didn't know that they had a choice, which is kind of incredible in this day and age. And then we've had hundreds of articles, and we know it's hundreds because my team's been counting the amount of articles that have covered the film, you know, from Newsweek to New York Times to the Today Show. And then we were lucky enough to do a PBS spin-off series, which allowed us to cover multiple other reproductive stories, you know, BIPOC stories, LGBTQ, and that was really important and on my heart as well. You know, I'm a white heterosexual woman. And so that was wonderful. And that series is called Should We Kid or Not, and is available. You can just search for that. It's on the PBS website. And I was really lucky to have the opportunity to write for a TV writer's blog, and it was the most shared article they'd ever had. So obviously networks or people are hungry for this. We just need to be talking about this more to show that there's this real hunger, and this is where we all come in, which is amazing. So what's always been important to me in my films, I've made a number of films, and is actually making a change and creating impact. And so a lovely thing, and I love starting with positive stories, is that we've reached the impact goals that we set for this film, and it just really makes my team incredibly happy that we've done that. And somewhat thanks to PMC as well, because you supported our work last year, which enabled us to do that too. So yeah, I could go on, and I won't, Missy. So we have a lot to get through, I know.
Yeah, but thank you for sharing that. And amazing to hear that this is just expanding and spreading, to get this conversation across more screens, in more people's lives. A question for you, as you set out to construct the film, were you drawn to constructing it as it is, or was there some defining moment that made you turn the camera on yourself as you confronted, the idea of whether you would be child-free?
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I was making a really boring film to begin with. It was like going around and interviewing people, and then another talking head interview and another one, and I just wasn't being brave. And I am part of a film collective, and they were like, Maxine, this is your search to own your identity, right? To own this child freedomness. So why aren't you in it? But I am no actress, and I like being behind the camera. So that was very brave for me. But I knew people would relate more, storytellers, this is why Amy's book's out. And, there's more and more now about this, because storytelling really allows people to relate to you, right? And people seeing my struggle to own my identity and my vulnerability, I think, has really allowed people to access what they've been feeling and feel free to share as well. So, my dream from the very beginning was that people would share this film with people that were pressurizing them to have kids, whether it's, their parents, their colleagues, their friends, etc., etc. And that dream's been wonderfully realized. The film keeps getting shared in that way. So yeah, that's been pretty awesome.
Good for you. It is very scary to share your own story. So we certainly appreciate that vulnerability that you've brought to this space. A question about another person that we meet in the course of your film. So in the film, your husband decides to get a vasectomy. So thank you, Josh.
Seriously, thank you, Josh.
Yeah. But we also meet a 25-year-old who has struggles with hormonal birth control, but knows that she doesn't want to have any children. And during the period of time we see her during the film, it's a 3-year search to find a healthcare provider who will help, sterilize her by tying her tubes. It's now been another 2 years since your film was released. Could you give us an update on Megan?
Yeah, and for those, again, that have seen the film, and I know Dr. Gupta can talk about this much more than me, but for, contraception's amazing. Please use it. Please don't, it's incredible. So is emergency contraception for those that saw me use it in the film. But for some young women, or many women, whether they're young or reaching their menopause, there are serious side effects at times for more vulnerable people using certain contraception. And this was Megan's case. And so she was very determined. She wanted, as you mentioned, permanent birth control. And unfortunately, I did an update with her a few months ago, and her contraception failed her, and she's had to have an abortion. And in this day and age, especially in America, when we know abortion rights are, really being fought against, Megan shouldn't have had to go through that. But, we know that that's also being something that's really threatened. But I'm not going to end on that note, because that's such a sad note. What we've been working hard to do with the film, and again with your help, PMC, is we've managed to collect together a number of doctors in the UK, and this is really exciting, and we've written together a letter to the Royal College, the Training College of OBGYNs, to make real change in education. So when you go and see your doctor, whether it's your primary care physician or your gynecologist, they understand this reproductive choice that's child-free. And that's been really exciting, and we hope to continue that in as many countries around the world that's receptive to it with those training colleges. And also the last thing before I jump off for you to talk to everyone else, because this is an amazing panel. We're really excited that it looks like we're going to be getting a public television broadcast early next year, which we're thrilled about. And we're still looking for sponsors. So if anybody here feels this is on their heart, that they want to get the film out into the world, that would be amazing. But thank you for bringing up Megan's story, because that really is a tragedy in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess it just goes again without saying, just a huge thank you to you and to Megan and all of the other people in the film for sharing their perspectives and being willing to share their personal stories. It's much appreciated. Stories do change the world. So we will come back to you, Maxine, but yes, let's get the rest of the panel involved. Let's turn now to you, Dr. Blackstone. So as a nationally recognized expert in the child-free movement, you've got a lot of history researching the growing number of adults choosing to be child-free. So I wanted to ask you, given the history of the movement, why is the idea of someone being child-free so radical? And I guess why also is the concept of somebody who is child-free living a full life and being part of healthy families and being powerful contributors to societies, why is that radical?
Thanks, Missy. That's a great question. And I think one that those of us who are child-free have been asking ourselves for a long time. And I think when I get asked this question, I often think of one of my favorite sociologists of gender, Judith Lorber, who once said of gender that talking about gender for most people is the equivalent of fish talking about water. In other words, it's so much a part of our everyday life. It's so embedded in how we understand the world that it feels strange to look at it and to question it. And I think the same thing can be said about parenthood. We live in culture and globally, really, where the idea that we will all become parents, that it is our destiny, particularly as women, is so deeply entrenched that it can be jarring to question that. Because I often use the example of if you look at a toy store and walk down the aisle for girls' toys. Even today, I mean, it's changed over the last 60 years, but even today, you'll see very clearly that girls are taught, from a very young age that it is their destiny to become mothers. It is their purpose to become mothers. And we all learn that from the moment we're born. So to question it can be difficult and confusing and jarring sometimes.
Yeah, I love the water quote, of just like you don't notice what you're immersed in. It's so true. I guess, in your writing and speaking, you talk a lot about prenatalism, which relates to the water around us. Can you tell us what that is and how that impacts girls' rights and reproductive health choices?
Yes, absolutely. I will say, I'm so glad you started with the trailer of Maxine's film, because I think that demonstrates so beautifully, without even using the term, what prenatalism is and how embedded it is in our culture. So prenatalism simply is a political, economic, religious system that is designed to encourage childbearing, and particularly designed to encourage high birth rates within nation states. So we see prenatalism really all over the world, but it's particularly visible when we think about Western nations across the world who are seeing reductions in childbearing rates, and the response often, as one example, in Italy, when childbearing rates really took a nosedive, the country enacted the health system enacted a media effort to encourage women to bear children with posters that said things like fertility is a public good. So, that is pronatalism right there. The idea that as women, our fertility is not our own, but it belongs to the government and the economy. Tells us, that is pronatalism right there. And the reason that we are immersed in this ideology is that our economy is set up on the assumption that new workers will always be produced. And without the production of new workers, our economic system it can't be supported. So, there are reasons that our politicians are worried about birth rates, but I think that we're long overdue for rethinking the system that that has built this pronatalist ideology and has supported it.
Yeah, and I think to hear you speak to the first question and the second question, it sounds to me like one is just kind of this inundation where we are internalizing and how that's forming us as our own decision makers and as we judge the decisions of others. And then to hear kind of some of the mechanisms that are very unrelated to, questions that you often get about, that the woman in the trailer about, I was told I won't be a real woman unless I have children. You got this other aspect where it's, got these other motivations in terms of why is there this drive for everybody to have children? Can you tell us how those combine to, impact girls' rights and reproductive health choices?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the idea of myths that we have about child-free people. There's a reason that these myths persist. And again, I think it goes back to the reality that our economic system relies on the production of new workers. But some of those myths include the idea that you're not a real woman unless or until you become a mother. And certainly that impacts women's and girls' rights. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that pronatalism is rooted in nationalist, ethnocentric, and even racist ideologies that suggest that, some women should be encouraged to become mothers, others are prevented from becoming mothers. So in the US, we have a very long history of eugenic policies that prevent women of color from becoming mothers. So not only does pronatalism tell us that women should become mothers and are destined to become mothers, it's a system that encourages only some women to become mothers and pushes some women to become mothers and discourages and even forces others to not become mothers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's, for anybody attending today who has not read Dr. Blackstone's book, I highly recommend it. I think this being able to pull this apart to understand some of the different motivations in history and really looking at how this plays across so many different equity issues that we see across reproductive health and numerous rights for individuals is really important. Thank you, Dr. Blackstone. We will come back to you later in the conversation. For now, let's turn over to Dr. Gupta to gain a medical-based perspective. So before we jump into questions for Dr. Gupta, though, I do want to let the audience know that we found Dr. Gupta because she and her clinics were endorsed in the very lively Childfree Reddit community. So as Megan's story that Maxine shared earlier, kind of personalized this struggle to find supportive medical providers. And Dr. Gupta is somewhat of a star in those spaces for her services. So Dr. Gupta, let's start with that. What is different about receiving healthcare from you versus other healthcare centers that's led you to be on these Reddit lists?
First of all, I had no idea about being on Reddit or anything. When you told me, I was like, oh, really? Okay, then let me try to find out. Then I went on Reddit and I still couldn't find it, but that's just me being older. As far as healthcare, I think the basis of providing good healthcare, especially women's healthcare, is do not judge. And this is my motto for the entire team. We're not here to judge people. Our mission is simple and straight: to provide compassionate and holistic care to all women when they need it, period. So that's where a lot of problems with other healthcare providers comes in, is we bring in our own preconceptions and our own familial maybe values or whatever we grew up with into providing care, whereas healthcare should be completely free of any biases, personal biases. Being in India, I practiced in India before coming to the US, and I was a practicing OBGYN there. So I got the same feedback from patients all the time. They're like, oh, how come you don't have kids? I would be like, this is my choice. So after a while, I just stopped trying to justify it. I'm like, I'm here to give you care. So as long as I can do the best of my ability, then it shouldn't matter to you. And the same thing here. I have 5 locations now, over 30 providers, and all of them, we have the same standardized healthcare sort of paradigm that we're not here to judge you. You want this, we're going to work with you to find the best choice for you that may work for you. That's, I think that's amazing. And it's also one of those things where it's easy to say and hard to do, so hats off to you and your team for bringing that non-judgmental space to life. I guess there's such a need for quality care. I guess a question for you would be, at a systemic level, do you think there's some sort of a route to the challenges, to that judgmental aspect, or to whatever it is that's really hindering that quality of care, and some sort of systemic approach to improvement? I think it's a training issue. It's an entire, we go through residency, we go through the motions of doing the check boxes of, hey, you know how to take care of fibroids and bleeding and hysterectomy and this and that. But when it really comes to, these pills are not working. For example, Maxine's story, Megan's story, pills are not working for me. And then regular training will just tell you, okay, try a different pill, then go to the injections, go to this, go to that. Even we were taught that if someone under 35 is requesting sterilization, you need the consent of 2 providers, you need to give her like multiple time periods, waiting time and all that. So whereas the person is like, I am an adult, I can make my own decisions, so it is my responsibility if I'm going to have regret or not. So the systemic issue is a training issue, and if we can inculcate this in our training programs and actually educate the educators on how to train residents, then they can come out and be more comfortable approaching this. I made that happen for my team by constantly educating them, but I'm only like a small drop in the ocean. So this has to really start from medical school. Yeah, and I guess a question, as you think about what that training may look like or what it would encompass, going back to what Dr. Blackstone was speaking about, do you think that some of that training would need to disarm some of that, help people understand, the water that they're swimming in that they may not see, or the pronatalism that's driving at some of the motivations or history of why this is such an assumed position, that you will have children? Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if we can really get down and add this to the curriculum, and also just educate people more about the various options that are available, and, like, we used to do just tubal ligation before. Now because tubal ligation, which is just tying the tubes, has a failure rate as well. So now we've started doing salpingectomies, which means removing the entire tube, so that the chances are almost negligible. But it's a constant struggle that women deal with, and there are not many options available if they want, because the physicians are not very comfortable going through the entire gamut of, the entire spectrum.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Yeah, medical care, as we all know, is so essential to reproductive choice. So thank you for what you and your staff and your clinics are doing.
Thank you.
Let me turn now to Emma. So Emma, I want to get into why you have founded the climate change movement, No Future, No Children. You say that you always saw yourself as having kids. So what did you go through to make this decision?
Sure. I feel like I can bring more of like a younger generation's perspective to this conversation, because I know that my sentiments of, like, we live in a time of like rapid and growing inequality. Like we live in a time where climate change is something that we really, really have to worry about. And so, for a lot of people in my generation, it's not necessarily like we don't want kids because we don't like kids or we don't want to be parents. It's like we really, really actually would like to be mothers and would like to have families, but we can't even take care of ourselves. Like we're looking 20 years into the future and things are bleak. Like, for example, coronavirus was certainly like the effects of the virus, just like the fact that it spread as a result of, animals losing their natural habitats as a result of like industrialization and climate change. We're looking at a future full of extreme weather events, of heat waves, of forest fires, of, storm systems, and, more pandemics, and just like this growing inequality that makes it so difficult for us to consider ourselves as parents. And so I think that's really where people my age are coming from. I think that the desire to be child-free is kind of a symptom of like a larger societal issue.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think just being familiar with the climate science and what the future really looks like. So can you tell us, with that in mind, how did you envision No Future, No Children working exactly? Like, who were you hoping would take the pledge, and what were you hoping to impact?
Sure, absolutely. So I think a big issue when it comes to climate change in my generation is that we're saying a lot, we're putting a lot of effort into it, but at the end of the day, like the people who really have the power to make the changes, they don't care. We're easily ignored for the most part. And so this pledge, I think it's like twofold. It kind of came about as just a way to like express, that like deep eco-anxiety and just like general hopelessness with regards to the future that, really characterizes my generation, because I've talked to a lot of my friends about this, and this isn't just like a fringe sentiment. It's really, really common. And so it came about as a way to like express those feelings and to hopefully like get them out there. And then also we really made the pledge in hopes that it would connect again with those people who otherwise wouldn't care. And we thought that it would be useful in doing that because, if you want to reach, your grandparents, that generation, even your parents, they've lived, a greater portion of their lives. And so, 40 years into the future isn't something that worries them as much as it worries my generation. And just hearing about the effects of climate change, unless you're that rare, super empathetic person, usually doesn't drive home a message. But if you change the narrative to we've already seen a degree of warming, we are losing diversity, to I feel afraid for my future, and therefore I am not having children, and therefore you are not having grandchildren. For the first time, that there's a personal side to it, especially here, in North America and Canada. And so we launched this pledge right before an election, and just in hopes that people would take the pledge and share it on their social media so that their parents and their friends would see it and hopefully share it or feel inspired, or just feel a little bit of that worry and that, eco-anxiety that we feel in my generation.
Thank you for explaining that. How many people have taken the pledge, Emma?
Okay, so I am a university student. The pledge, unfortunately, was not funded by like a super elite hidden liberal group. It was funded by me. And so we took down the website. We just didn't pay the fee because it was like, well, it was like more than a Netflix subscription per month. But last time I checked, there was like over 10,000 people who had signed it.
And did you provide, as part of taking the pledge, did you provide people with, or did you have thoughts about like how those conversations would go, that they would be inspiring with, or that the pledge would be inspiring with other groups of people, in terms of what you wanted them to talk about or how you wanted them to navigate those conversations to ultimately move people and communities and governments into action?
I would say not specifically. I think something that was really important to me about this pledge is that I really wanted it to be just a place for people to express their own personal feelings. I wanted it to be like deeply personal. And I think that's kind of what makes it so impactful, is there's just such a wide range of people who've taken the pledge. And what really surprised me, I think the most, is that we got really young people, like 13, 12, who'd somehow found this website and typed their like story up. And then also like older people who'd already, again, like made that choice to be child-free because of some of the same sentiments. And I think that like the fact that it was able to resonate with so many groups of people is what made it so powerful. I mean, I do think that there are ways in which the pledge was interpreted, which is like certainly something that I wouldn't speak for, like people who believe that population control is the way to combat climate change, when in reality, like it genuinely couldn't be further from the truth. Like overpopulation is not driving climate change. Overconsumption, certainly, but that's a Western issue. And I really believe that placing that onus on other countries is just racist. Anyway, so I really have always tried to speak against that narrative. And I also think there's some really interesting and like powerful opposition to the pledge, not necessarily like opposition to the message, but just again, like those personal narratives for people who haven't taken the pledge and their own reasons with respect to climate change. Like I know for some people, their culture is really important. And for them, having children and passing down that culture is their way of resisting and fighting climate change. And so, yeah, I think that just that extreme range of opinion is really what made it impactful, as opposed to any one viewpoint that I really wanted to share.
Well, the 10,000 people taking the pledge is really dramatic and amazing, especially as you said, this is an unfunded or we'll say modestly funded, campaign itself. And I think speaks to what Maxine found too, in terms of just the people wanting to share the story of why this choice resonated for them and why they were moving towards this choice. So thank you so much for that. I think a question that jumps to my mind related to this pledge actually is for you, Dr. Blackstone. As I hear Emma speak about the campaign, I think back to prenatalism, and just in terms of, as we, Emma chose to do this before an election, just the pressure and sense of why we need to have external pressure on people having children. Can you, speak at all to why prenatalism, just anything else that we could learn from you about why it's so embedded, or I guess you've already spoken to that, so more so like, how do we disrupt that cycle?
Yeah, so thanks, Emma. I love, I was aware of the movement and the effort, but I loved hearing directly from you more about it. And I think that it was really smart to target folks who are concerned that they won't have grandchildren someday. I mean, those are the folks who today are the policymakers, and finding a way to speak their language and to to zero in on an issue that matters to them, I think was brilliant. So, I mean, I think that Emma's right on target. And I know that we are hearing more today about the impact of consumption and how that has shaped climate change. I will say there have been climate activists for many, many years. I mean, the zero population growth movement of the 60s and 70s also brought this issue to our attention that I mean, that I think the focus was more on overpopulation, and to Emma's very good point, consumption is the problem. But I'm so glad that we are coming back to this conversation. I wish we'd done it a little bit earlier, but Emma, you give me hope, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. I guess, you know, as we think about the ecosystem around this choice, and you know, we were talking about it from individual perspectives and the medical perspective and societal perspectives. You know, Dr. Gupta, back to your questions about training and how to create that non-judgmental space. I mean, it seems like such a gargantuan task across any group of people. But when I think also about the breadth of med school and what people are learning, you know, in that space already, I guess, do you think that you know, Maxine's film, for example, or this panel, or Dr. Blackstone's book, or you know, Emma's ability to interpret climate science and her sharing her stories, Megan's story, do any of these different stories, would they have an impact on, you know, attitudes and behaviors in the medical industry? Like, would that training, do you think that training would really be effective to open an opportunity for, you know, more acceptance, I guess?
So great question, Missy. The thing in the medical world, everything revolves around evidence-based medicine, right? So we need studies, and actually being a part of this panel and seeing that Emma has 10,000 pledges, that's a ground for research right there. So, you know, the main thing that we were taught, we have older studies which say there's a very high regret rate. There's a 35% regret rate after sterilization, and that's what we were told. So if we can get a good data, evidence-based research, meaning comparative analysis of 10,000 women who chose to be child-free and don't have regret versus others who did have regret, that's it. That's all we need. We just need like solid research-backed, you know, statements, and that's really all it is. And just to back up on what I was also saying earlier, you know, education about birth control is one thing, but also there are options out there. So if there is regret, if someone does undergo salpingectomy, nowadays IVF is very easily available. And that is what I tell patients too, you know, okay, you know, maybe 5 years down the line, you meet someone you really, really want to have a baby with, and you want their genetic material and want to make babies, that's fine. You can do it. There's IVF there. So as a, you know, as an OBGYN, we should know that both the options are available. And women nowadays can freeze their eggs before, and there's so many options where they can really bank it for the future in case they change their mind.
That's really helpful. So it sounds like kind of where the emphasis is in the medical community is on, we want the story told in a statistically significant data-based way. And also we still feel a lot better if we kind of hedge our bets, like there's ways to reverse things that are still effective, so that if you never change your mind, you know that this will work for you forever. I guess, you know, how one side of that is the medical question, you know, in terms of what's possible and what's not. And the other side of that is, you know, if it weren't for this panel, we may not know that Emma has 10,000 signatures on this particular pledge. So how do we get to that social research? You know, the research on, like, is this socially acceptable? Are there numbers behind this? Is this, I guess, how do we get to that type of narrative?
With help of people like Emma and Reddit, and like building communities, right? And then ask women to volunteer their information, and then we can have a retrospective study if they've already chosen to be child-free, and that's how we accumulate people.
And so
Can I chime in here as a social scientist?
Yeah.
I mean, there are data. I think one of the problems is that for many years, social scientists haven't agreed on how to measure the idea of being child-free. So is it just that somebody makes the proclamation and that's what they are? Do we only decide a person is child-free once they've passed their, childbearing years and, and we can know for sure that they won't ultimately become pregnant and have kids. So it's tricky, but there are data, and I have to put a plug in for my book, which reviews the social science on this question. And then I would also add that I think it's reasonable to be concerned about the question of regret, but I think if we do that, we must also ask the question about parental regret, which is vastly understudied, but a sociologist by the name of Orna Donath just wrote a great study on that question. So I think we're beginning to ask that very important question as well, and we need data on that question too.
Thank you, Dr. Blackstone. Awesome. Well, we are getting close to the end here, so let me take a look at questions, and we'll get a couple more questions in before we end.
Well, you're looking, Missy. Can I just also jump off Amy as well? Because I think the problem Amy's alluding to as well is how do you get parents to talk about their regret of having a child? And it took us forever to find this wonderfully brave woman who features in our film that talks about regret of parenthood. And I think that, stigmas are starting to break down. She was one of the first to ever write about it, which enabled us to find her. And then she was brave enough to come on camera. But as in all statistics, and obviously Amy knows so much more about this, but how do we reach these people that are brave enough to respond exactly as they really feel too? And I think that's been some of the issues. And also, again, just agreeing with Amy, there's also reports on actually the regret of having a sterilization of a parent as opposed to somebody who's child-free. Everyone gets caught up in like, oh, a child-free person might regret it. Well, actually, there are reports out there that child-free people don't regret it as often as people seem to suggest. And parents who want another child are the ones that are actually heavily weighing that statistic. So we have to really break apart. And it's thanks to everyone's work on this panel that we can start kind of putting this work out there so people can hear it and listen to it and take it and use it.
Yeah, thank you for that too, Maxine. I think another great point of just how easily, because of all of these different forces, how easily these narratives get shifted or changed. And actually there is data that exists, to Amy's point, and it's not being pulled apart correctly to really tell the whole story, or it's not being put together correctly to tell the whole story, and how damaging that is in terms of giving people the ability to make their own choices, that this pressure exists to push people in ways that they may not want to do for very real, very personal, very big life decisions. As we come to the end here, why don't we wrap up with one final question for you, Maxine? Today we've talked a lot about some of these oppressing forces, and also, what might be some opportunities to address those oppressing forces, to address those obstacles. But it's also equally important, I think, that we just hold space for the celebration for those who do have the agency to make their choice, and I think that's one of the things that is powerful about this panel here today that I really appreciate, as people who have that ability and who can then share their journeys, whatever that journey may be for them. So Maxine, I guess from your perspective, could you illuminate, I think the film got into some of these really, I don't know what to call them, like foundational pieces of being child-free. And so could you speak a little bit to some of the ways for you, that child-free, how you see it strengthening, individuals or families or communities or just the entire global community?
One thing we haven't really talked about is there's many avenues to becoming child-free, right? Emma's saying, it's resources. She actually wants to be a mum. For me, it was very much the lack of resources and overpopulation actually that really figured into my decision. But there are many, many reasons. I just want to sit a little bit with legacy, because people often talk about what they're leaving behind. And somebody, when I was filming them, said, I want somebody to remember me. And it made me laugh. And I actually said to her, but you'll be dead. Like, you won't even know if anyone will remember you by that stage. And a brilliant writer once put it that surely it's better for us in this day and age to leave the world without our mark on it. And that's really stayed with me. That maybe that's the better place. That could be our legacy, that we, don't mess up the world. Anyway, I won't stay on that too much longer, but community is really, really important. And I'm an auntie. I was a very supportive sister to my single mum, to my sister who was a single mum. And community is incredibly important to those of us who are child-free. And, look at Amy's book about the amount of stats there are on how much we volunteer. And there's a lot of, we're out there, we're teachers, we're social workers, we might be, the person that stays behind at school with your child. There's many of us. And if we can just talk about this very casually as another choice, open up those doors, it doesn't have to have this weight around it. It's just another reproductive choice. And, and we could talk about reports till the cows come home, but there is one about how happy we are as being child-free and how fulfilled. And I just want to leave that as sort of like my final point, is that, we're kind of, it's nice to sort of know that there's, especially in this day and age, that we can be happy and fulfilled in our lives as well. And a lot of us child-free feel like that. So, if you're on the fence or you're struggling with this decision, please find our work. There's more books, there's more films, there's more coming out, which is wonderful. So, and thank you so much to PMC. This really has been a great panel.
Great. Well, thank you, Maxine. Thank you, Dr. Blackstone and Dr. Gupta and Emma. Hearing everybody speak, it's just amazing. The discussion about being child-free just traverses back and forth from super personal considerations to societal constructs, to global impacts, and across obviously all sorts of emotions, joy, happiness, fulfillment, difficulty, frustration, all sorts of different experiences, because we are human and we are trying to make the best choices that we can for ourselves. And I think it is very important to, just acknowledge that so many women around the world aren't able to make the choice to be child-free, or to make the No Future, No Children pledge, because they just don't have that agency to control, if and when they have children. And as everybody here knows, that anything that removes agency is wrong. People should never be forced to be child-free and never be forced to have children. And back to what Dr. Blackstone was talking about in terms of those pressures that are different based on who you are in the world. So thank you so much to all of you here on the panel for sharing your personal and professional stories. Obviously at PMC, we believe a sustainable future depends on the stories that we share. And you all are out there, creating your own stories and sharing them, which just inspires and influences the stories of other people. So thank you for, as Maxine said at the very beginning, thank you for being so brave.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to also thank all of our audience members today and our donors who joined us today for your dedication to the notion that every woman should be able to freely determine if and when she has children. The panel has graciously agreed for some of these Q&A questions that I see coming in through the Q&A during the panel that we were not able to get to. We will select a couple of them and get their answers to those and send you an email next week when we've got that up with their written responses to some of those. And then, of course, we could not do work like this without your support. So if you feel so moved by this event today and the work that we accomplished together, please donate at populationmedia.org/donate. For our Giving Circles members who are on the call today, you've received another Zoom link, and that is for the VIP meet and greet with the panelists, which will get started promptly at 11:10 a.m. Pacific or 2:10 Eastern. And if you are in a different time zone, I apologize that you'll have to do the math on your own. But thank you to everyone for coming. To close, we'll play a very short 45-second clip that just reiterates the power of stories. And we couldn't do this without the powerful and amazing people in this Zoom room and all over the world who create and share their stories. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
For thousands of years, stories have inspired us, taught us, and guided our life choices. A powerful story can change our lives and have a domino effect on our communities, countries, and the world. What will your story be? Together, we can build a sustainable planet with equal rights for all. Help us write the next chapter. Become part of our story.